The Blue Jackets may have won the game, but the Sharks won the Celebrini Bowl. We're talking all about that on today's Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms, on YouTube, and on SiriusXM. I also want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app, use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. It's a squadcast for the first time in a little bit here. The Blue Jackets faced off against the San Jose Sharks yesterday and came out on top with about 12 seconds left in regulation, which was a lot of fun. So I've got my very good friend, JD Young of Locked On Sharks, and we're going to do a little bit of a crossover episode. We're going to talk about the game. We're going to talk about the trade deadline, where the two teams are headed in the near future, and we're going to look at Kent Johnson's development path versus William Eklund's development path. So I'm just going to get right into my conversation with JD.
And now we bring in Secret Sharks fan, but the host of the Columbus Locked On Columbus Blue Jackets, Jay Forster. Jay, how's it going, buddy?
It's going. I am actually, just for full disclosure, this is what I'm wearing for the recording today.
The
Thomas until I came into the
Thomas
studio,
Boiler Sharks
Secret Sharks
hoodie.
fan. It's me.
The Secret Sharks. You've actually been to more Sharks games this year than I have, and I don't think it's actually kind of close at this moment, but. So you were actually at the Blue Jackets Sharks game on Saturday, which was kind of crazy between two bad teams, and it felt like this game could have been very much a Blue Jackets like 5-1 win if it wasn't for Johnny Gaudreau forgetting how to score and Capo Kakinen kind of stealing the show at least. Jackets do end up winning this game with 13 seconds left because of Boone Jenner and Alexander Barabanov forgetting how to back check. But what is your big takeaway coming out of this game, at least from the Blue Jackets perspective?
God, these teams are both real bad, aren't they? The thing is, a lot of the Sharks games I've watched this season have been against good opponents. And so I'm like, it makes sense that they look bad. And I wondered if watching them play a different bad team would make them look better. No, it just looks like two bad teams playing. Which, in fairness, I think the Blue Jackets were the better team last night. I think Johnny Gaudreau is extremely cursed because, what was it? It was three breakaways.
Yeah.
So I think he had two breakaways, and then he scored, which was disallowed. The slap shot that almost broke Capo Kakinen, he tried to go around the back of the net and do that. He tried to score every single way, and it just wasn't happening for him. But I do think the best play of the night was that pass to Boone Jenner, and Boone Jenner just snuck right in between both of the Sharks players, and scored actually an identical goal to Anthony Duclair's first goal against Elvis, I thought, which I did like the poetic bookending of the game,
where the puck just kind of slides underneath, and both even Duclair
you think
was
you've got it, and it just momentum. It just, you haven't squeezed your knees together quite enough.
And even Duclair was
I've allowed a lot of goals like that in my life, so it's always, those are the worst ones that just kind of keep rolling in. I guess that's the biggest takeaway, I think, is the Blue Jackets are still they're improving. I think I saw a lot of things last night that the second Duclair goal, I think, would have been a backbreaker earlier in the season. They probably would have folded a cheap suit, and the Sharks would probably have won that game 5-2, 5-3, whatever the score was at that point. So they're learning, they're getting better, but man, it's a tough game to watch. It was a lot of fun to watch. I had a good time. It was not a good game of hockey.
No, I have been cursed to watch a lot of bad hockey this season. The defense in both these just constant like odd man rushes. You mentioned Gaudreau had a lot of breakaway chances, even like Anthony Duclair's goal. And I know I forget the
Both of his
defender
goals were breakaway goals.
Yeah, like it just basically fell down and Duclair. But that was basically the only way kind of both teams, kind of got their offense created was off the rush. And then it was very much a back and forth game where, I mean, even with the goals, like it was every time somebody scored, it was a quick response from another team. And I think both teams did a good job of kind of controlling play for a little while. Like there was times where it was definitely, okay, the Sharks are kind of pushing and then the Blue Jackets were kind of pushing. But yeah, this was definitely two bad teams playing bad hockey, and at least it was entertaining, which is for a good chunk of Sharks games, we haven't actually been entertained this year. So I will take an entertaining game where they lost. And this was the perfect tank game, right? You kind of showcase Anthony Duclair. There's a bunch of scouts. He scores 2 goals. Anthony Duclair is we'll talk about Duclair here in a little bit. Big name in the trade deadline. And then you lose the game in regulation with 13 seconds left as Chicago wins, so the Sharks are now back within 2 points of Chicago. Everything's coming out Millhouse over here in San Jose. At least that's the hope. But before we get into like where these teams are kind of heading and stuff, but at least in the short term, like you mentioned, this team, the Blue Jackets are kind of improving right now. And as we're a couple weeks away from the trade deadline, what are you kind of looking for from this team? As Fantilli will hopefully be back at some point this season. We'll see. I know the timeline's going to be really, really close there. What are you kind of looking for over the next couple of weeks from this team?
Sell everyone over the age of 25. No, that's kind of an over exaggeration, but like the thing is, the Blue Jackets don't have a lot of. They have a lot of pieces. I don't know if they have a lot of pieces that other people or other teams are going to want to pick up. Like, I'm over the Ivan Provorov experience. I was never really into the Ivan Provorov experience, but
fair.
He is actively detrimental to this team now, as opposed to just being kind of ineffective on defense. I don't know what you thought of the Ivan Provorov experience last night, but it sure was. He was there. He exists. So he's a piece that I think that they could potentially look at moving. It's going to be really interesting, the trade deadline, because obviously Jarmo Kekalainen just got fired. John Davidson is going to be running the trade deadline. The AGMs will surely be pretty heavily involved there. So I'm interested to know how that's going to look, because I had kind of a couple of, I had some ideas of what Kekalainen was going to do, but he's not there. It's kind of a weird unknown quantity. Jack Rostovich is probably on the move. Andrew Peeke is going to look real good in Toronto. I know that you're like real pushing for me to get Mario Ferraro, but
yeah, him and Mario Ferraro are going to be holding hands, skipping the
basically that's what it's going to be. Yeah. There's a lot of pieces that could move, and there's no one that I'm sure is going to move. The only one that I'm really, really sure about is I think Jack Rostovich goes, but the Blue Jackets just don't have a lot of expiring contracts. Or they don't have a lot of expiring UFAs. They have a bunch of expiring RFAs that they have to find. They have to find the money for. Kent Johnson, who we're going to talk about in a minute. Cole Sillinger is up this year. Igor Chinikov is up this year as well, I think. Kirill Marchenko, I don't think is up this year, but like the Blue Jackets are going to have to figure out a way to find the cap space for all of these young guys. Texier needs a new deal. There's a lot of moving parts to this roster, and I'm going to be really interested to see what happens. Oh, Kirill Marchenko does need a new contract this summer. Awesome. Love this. It's going to be great. It's going to be great. Jake Bean actually is the other guy that I could see moving. I forgot that he was up. He's up in this summer. So like lots and lots and lots of moving pieces, but also it could very much be that they just don't do anything. I think the market is in a weird place right now. I think the Sean Monahan deal really set the tone in a way that I think a lot of GMs are going to be unhappy with. The goalie market is static because no one wants to trade for a goalie, because no one wants to pay for a goalie. We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see where it goes. But I think the Sharks are kind of in a similar place. They have better pieces, I think. Unfortunately, the pieces that they're probably going to get the most money for are the pieces I think that they would probably like to keep. Like, I think Anthony Duclair would look real good on this rebuilding Sharks team. They could probably
He's
re-sign him
gone.
to keep. But
He's
yeah,
gone.
he's probably gone. Zetterlund, I don't know if he moves.
No.
But again, he's a piece that I think that they would like to keep. Ferraro, I think you could probably punt to literally any other team and be fine with that. But it's going to be trade deadline's going to be weird this year. I feel like I have a hunch that this trade deadline is going to be real weird.
Yeah, we'll get more into the trade deadline here in a minute and kind of the direction of these teams and where they're kind of heading all in 1 second.
First, I'm going to tell you guys about Camino Consulting. How would you like to get to know someone better in an hour than you would in a year? Understanding one another better prevents small misunderstandings from becoming big, ongoing fights. After providing more than 20 years of service to small and mid-sized businesses, helping management groups navigate conflict and onboarding new employees, Camino is now offering a digital seminar for families and couples. Did your Valentine's gift of tickets to the game not go over as well as you'd hoped? You can fix that. Get the Couples and Family Online Seminar for 25% off the month of February using the discount code Locked On. That's discount code Locked On for 25% off for the rest of the month at CaminoConsulting.ca, or mention Locked On when reaching out for a business seminar and receive the first 5 profiles free. Once again, that is CaminoConsulting.ca, LOCKEDON, for the discount code for 25% off.
All right, so let's get into kind of where we started kind of talking about the trade deadline with the Sharks, and again, the Sharks do have more attractive pieces, potentially, but again, it's such a weird year. You know, you look at like Duclair, who we talked about earlier, and I think is going to be an attractive piece for a team who wants to try to add some middle six scoring. Right? You look at a team like the Rangers. Anthony Duclair revenge tour continues. It's weird how he's been on like every team, it feels like, without you realizing like he's been on every team. But he's been on a lot of teams. You know, if Duclair, he also represents himself, and he's had a really up and down year with the Sharks where he's played on the fourth line. He's been a healthy scratch in some games. Like I could see him wanting to go to somewhere else where he's surrounded with more talent and has opportunity to kind of set himself up for a nice contract going into this offseason. It would make a lot of sense to me. Barabanov, who's been really good with the Sharks this season, or before the season, but has had a terrible year going into a contract season. He broke his finger, and he just hasn't looked the same since his return. Of course, you have Couture and Hurdle, who have played a whopping like 4 games together this season. And then Nico Sturm has been kind of in and out of the lineup. Mikael Granlund, the same thing. The Sharks team has been a hot mess, and I think it's going to make for a very interesting trade deadline because the Sharks don't have that one piece, right? You had Timo Meier, you had Erik Karlsson, you had Brent Burns. You traded all those guys away. The return was looking better on some of them. I think the Timo Meier deal is looking way better now than it did when it happened a year ago. But again, I think it's for General Manager Mike Grier, it's going to be trying to kind of leverage the pieces that you do have as you continue to try to stockpile your assets as you go into this rebuild. So, I mean, for the Blue Jackets, right? I mean, we go into the season. This was kind of going to be the year where like, hey, we're going to be the fun, exciting young team, right? And that did not happen this year. So what do you think is the reason why this team didn't become the fun, young, exciting teams that we've seen like Detroit or like the Devils a couple years ago? What happened with this Blue Jackets team?
Cursed. No. I do want to say that I feel like the Sharks are kind of in a similar situation as the Blue Jackets were in last season, of everyone tradable died and was then untradeable. And you know, they were decimated by injuries, and every time someone got healthy, someone else left the lineup, and you know, all of their big guys were out for. I think Johnny Gaudreau and Andrew Peeke were the only 2 players that played over 80 games last season. They didn't have a single player who played all 82 games. So like the Sharks, I feel like and again, like just in where they are in terms of their pathway, they are 1 to 2 seasons behind where the Blue Jackets are, I think. The Blue Jackets, in terms of the trade deadline, again, are in a weird place because I think they're right on the cusp of falling into that kind of Coyotes trap of we just need a couple more good assets. We just need a couple more futures. This might be a hot take. You can have too many futures on your team, and I think the Blue Jackets are kind of reaching saturation point.
Yeah.
Like if
the
they are
Ducks are going to be right there soon too.
Yeah, exactly. They're a couple of years behind.
Yeah.
The Blue Jackets are in a place right now where I don't necessarily think drafting a Celebrini, for example, would be great. I don't know that changes the way that this franchise is moving in a way that is worth the misery of this season. So it's gonna be again really interesting. Like, do they trade for picks and just kind of kick the development can down the road? Do they trade for slightly older players that can kind of fit into the timeline? I don't know. In terms of what happened, they hired Mike Babcock and it killed all of the good vibes. And then the head coach Pascal Vincent got the job 4 days before training camp, and I don't think anyone has ever kind of really recovered from that.
Yeah.
A lot of the players have underperformed. There've been interesting lineup decisions. I think the team wasn't prepared to start the season. I think Pascal Vincent has been playing catch up. I don't think he knows what to do with his young players necessarily, which is shocking to me because I really liked what he did with the Manitoba Moose. And I was like, okay, usually, not always, but usually guys that have been in the AHL for a long time have a better handle on coaching young players and, as development coaches. And so I don't know what's going on there, but Pascal Vincent wasn't the coach that I thought he was going to be. Again, players underperforming. Like Johnny Gaudreau is shooting at like 5% this season.
Oh, he's going full Noah Gregor?
Before Zach Werenski's goal last night, he was shooting at, I think, literally 0.9%, So it's just a lot of guys are underperforming. There's been a lot of inconsistency in the lineup. I think Kekalainen tried to fast forward the rebuild in a way that wasn't sustainable. Obviously, bringing in Provorov, bringing in Severson. I don't think you need to do both of those things. I especially don't think that you needed to A, trade away futures, and B, sign 28-year-old Damon Severson for 8 years. But that's I'm not the general manager of an NHL team. What do I know? So just it feels like the left hand and the right hand just weren't talking to each other all summer, and the Blue Jackets are kind of reaping the problems of that. Because you're right, it should have been this team should be what the Canadians are kind of doing at the minute, where they're not great, but their young players are fun and doing a ton of great things. Like Yuri Slafkovsky is, looks like a monster in the past kind of couple of months of the season. It should have been this season should not have been a playoff season, but it should have been like there was no reason for Johnny Gaudreau not to have another 100-point season. There's no reason that Adam Fantilli shouldn't have been a 30-goal, 30-assist scorer in his rookie season. Ken Johnson should have exploded offensively. Like David Jiricek.
We'll talk Ken Johnson here in a minute.
Yeah,
but
David Jiricek should be in line for the Calder. And he's not. He's rotting in the. He's not rotting in the AHL. That's melodramatic. But there's just this team can't figure out what its narrative is.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of been the big problem is everyone wants something different. And as a result, nothing is happening.
It's weird because shifting over to the Sharks, there's actually a clear vision of we know what we're doing, right? We are going to get younger. We're going to get faster. We're going to, all the cliche things, but my career, I think is kind of doing it. I think he's doing it smart too with keeping some of the veterans around. And Hurdle and Couture will be a big offseason topic on whether they stay in San Jose or they go. But having those guys around for your guys like Eklund and then Henry Thrun, and I think the Sharks have actually kind of done pretty well with the development and kind of what they are. And we'll talk Eklund versus Kent Johnson here in a little bit, but you can see, I think, the growth and maturation from William Eklund. And yes, this season has been abysmal when it comes to wins and losses, but this team should be in contention to try to get Macklin Celebrini. And then if you pair Macklin Celebrini with William Eklund and Will Smith, and if Quentin Musty is what we think Quentin Musty is going to be, you could point to in a couple of years, be like, oh, wow, this Sharks team is going to be really fun and good, just like those Devils teams. I know we keep picking the Devils, but that Devils team has got a lot of young players, and it has, I know this year hasn't been the season that they wanted, but you can see why the Devils are really excited about their future, right? Or like you said with Montreal, where these guys, I know the Sharks are a couple of years behind, but yes, it's been tough, but like things are going in the right direction for San Jose, and I think Greer and Quinn are kind of doing things the right way. And it's easy to burn things down. It's always the hardest part is always to kind of build up, and that's that's always the hard part. But I think the Sharks are kind of doing it in the right. They're clearing their cap. They're trying to get whatever they can for some of these veterans. Maybe they could be a little bit better at getting pieces back, but I still think that they're putting themselves in the position to have sustainable success, right? And that's the vision right now. Sustainable success. You don't want to be that flash in the pan. Cool, we make it to you don't want to be the Wild, right? You make it to the playoffs every year, or and then you just lose in the first round. You want sustainable success where you're going to go on your next 10 to 15 year run like your previous Thornton and Marlowe years. That's the vision, at least for San Jose. Are they going to be able to do it? We'll see, but I think they're at least on the right path to that sustainable success.
I want to just kind of the thing that the Sharks seem to be doing, which is something that I wanted the Blue Jackets to do, and it's something I've kind of talked about in the end of the Jaro Kekalainen era, patience. The Sharks have committed to being terrible for if we take like this season and last season and like arguably the season before that into consideration, the Sharks have committed.
At least it's Mike Greer here. The Mike Greer.
The Sharks have committed to being bad for minimum 4 seasons. Yeah. The Blue Jackets got impatient. I think realizing that they could get Johnny Gaudreau and I'm not mad that they got Johnny Gaudreau. I'm genuinely not. I think he changed the way that this franchise is kind of spoken about around the league. But that maybe was the worst thing that they could have done in terms of the rebuild, because what it did was it gave the ownership hope. It gave Kekalainen hope, and he started making the wrong moves. He started being impatient. He started trying to move the rebuild faster than it should have been. And again, that's not sustainable success. The Sharks have committed to being terrible the Sharks are probably going to be in contention for the first overall pick next year. Again, I know it's a long path. A rebuild takes time. And I know that the joke is that, Ottawa's been rebuilding for the past 25 years or whatever. And Arizona has never finished the first rebuild, and like I get the jokes in there. I'm not picking on Ottawa or Arizona. They're just the Buffalo is another great example. I'm picking on them a little bit, but I'm allowed. My team is also terrible. Leave me alone. You've got to be patient with the rebuild. There's worry that you can be too patient, but the Sharks are doing the right thing. Eklund's going to be a rock star in this league.
Oh, we'll talk about Eklund here in a minute.
We'll talk about Eklund in a second, but like, I'm frustrated that guys like Gushin and Bordelot are kind of stuck in the AHL, but I think that's the right place for them. If you're not going to play, and again, this is something we'll talk about in the next segment. If you're not going to play them, sit them in the AHL. They can play 20 minutes a night and be rock stars down there. And I think that's what you're seeing with I think Tom Bordelot, I think, is mad that he's in the AHL and he's making it everyone's problem.
Yeah. We'll get there. Yeah, we'll talk about the patience here in a minute. So, we'll talk about Eklund versus Kent Johnson, guys who are picked 2 picks away from each other in the 2021 draft, and kind of where they're at, a couple of years from now, and which guy you maybe would rather have? Question mark, or at least how they've been kind of treated so far. So we'll discuss that here in just 1 minute. We're past the halfway point of the season, Sharks and Blue Jackets fans. And both the seasons have been bad. But regardless of where our teams are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing Daily Fantasy Hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number 1 choice for daily fantasy sports, especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick some of your favorite players, whether they're NHL studs like McDavid, Crosby, or McKinnon, or some of your favorite players on your favorite teams like Slippery Pete, Kent Johnson, whoever you like to root for. They'll record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Sharks and Jackets fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right. So Eklund and Kent Johnson. This has been kind of came to my attention. Max Miller, who works for Hockey News, kind of was tweeting about Kent Johnson's ice time, and it's been an interesting, just kind of how both teams are very bad, right? So you'd expect that you'd want your young players to kind of get a good run, and I'm just want to kind of look at how both of these guys were after their draft, kind of their experiences, right? Kent Johnson, right? Drafted, goes back to University of Michigan, finishes his season at Michigan, goes straight to the NHL, plays all of last year in the NHL. This year does not have the season that you kind of expect. Bounces around between the NHL and AHL. I think he played about 6 or 7 minutes on Saturday night. Look at William Eklund, right? Drafted, goes back to the SHL, plays for a terrible team in the SHL, where a lot of people were questioning, did the Sharks make a bad pick, right? Last year, spends basically the entire season in the AHL except for 8 games. And a lot of fans were like, hey, when are we going, myself included, when are we going to see William Eklund? When are we going to see William Eklund? William Eklund's too good to be playing the AHL. And then this year, William Eklund has played every game except for one where he was with an injury. Maybe not the production that you would have hoped, but again, this team has been #bad. But you're seeing kind of the fruits, the patience, as Jay you mentioned, right, of being a little bit slower with Eklund's development, not rushing him, and now Eklund is an NHL, everyday NHL player, and even comparing the stats, right. Again, Kent Johnson, who's played 125 games, he's got 22 goals, 37 assists, 59 points. Eklund, who's played 70 NHL games in his career, 10 goals, 22 assists, 32 points. While the numbers do favor Kent Johnson, the points per game is pretty close. I think Kent Johnson's at like 0.47 and Eklund's at 0.45. So like pretty close development. Remember, these guys are 2 picks apart. Jay, are you jealous of my Eklund stock? Just through the roof? No, what's up with that Kent Johnson? Like Kent Johnson,
don't know. This has been my biggest. This has been me all season. Is why doesn't Pascal Vincent trust Kent Johnson? And it's so frustrating. And like I tweeted about this a little bit on Saturday night after the game. I don't get it. I don't know what this kid has to do to earn more ice time, because in my mind anyway, and like I know, again, I tweeted about this and a couple of people came into my mentions, like he's not strong enough. He needs to be bigger. He doesn't need to be bigger. That's not how his game works. We don't have time to get into my 30-minute dive on Kent Johnson. But like, I will say for one thing, in terms of, I know that they have similar points per game. What I would be really interested in is seeing points per 60. Because we looked this up before the episode, Eklund is averaging about 18 minutes a night this season. Kent Johnson, I think last I checked, was averaging about 12 minutes a night. And again, he didn't get a ton of ice time last season because Brad Larson insisted on playing Sean Corelli and Mathieu Olivier and Eric Robinson for 18 minutes a night, but that's a whole other thing. I'm not necessarily jealous of your Eklund, because I think I think both players are very similar. Hugely skilled, smaller guys that are cheat codes in a way. I am jealous of your Eklund development. Do you know what I would do? Eklund played 20 minutes and 30 seconds last night or Saturday night in the game. Do you know what I would do for them to play Kent Johnson for 20 minutes a night? Unspeakable things that we can't talk about on this podcast. And it's so frustrating because, and again, like, I don't know what your thoughts were in terms of watching Kent Johnson in this game. You can see the flashes of what is going to be a very, very good player. He just isn't getting the opportunities. And, the Pascal Vincent is coming out into the media and saying, I'm putting Kent Johnson on the power play because I really like the way that he creates this specific type of offense. And I want to create that specific type of offense on the power play. And then he plays 8 minutes all game because they want to play, they want to play Boone Jenner, who, don't get me wrong, love Boone Jenner, huge Boone Jenner apologist. You can take Boone Jenner from my cold dead hands, Toronto. He has I believe, I could be wrong on this, I believe he has a degenerative back condition. He's had like 3 back surgeries. He's had his season cut short. Like both, like the last 2 seasons have both been cut short due to back injuries, and they're still playing him 22, 24, 26 minutes a night, and Kent Johnson is playing 8 minutes a night. I don't get it. Think about how effective Boone Jenner would be if you didn't need to play him 26 minutes a night. It's my argument for the defense. Think about how great your number one defenseman would be if he only played 20 minutes a night instead of 26, 28.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
So I did look up the points per 60 at 5v5. Eklund's at 1.0. Kent Johnson this year's at 2.2.
Okay.
So yes, I think though, like in these type of players, right? It's always the like, if you're not scoring, what else are you doing for me? And I think Eklund has a much more well-rounded game, right? Eklund playing on the penalty kill. Eklund, like, I think he's having to play second line center right now because
which I don't
all their center.
love. Just as a Sharks fan or secret Sharks fan, they're very similar players. Kent Johnson, they want him to be a center. I think he's much more effective on the wing, and I think Eklund's game is also much more effective on the wing.
I was hesitant. I'm coming around on Eklund playing center, but I would also like to get him better wingers than Alexander Barabanov, or actually it looks like
you don't
Mike
like Eklund playing with Mike Hoffman and Luke Cunnin?
Yeah. So that's a conversation for another day. But I do feel like though the Sharks' patience with Eklund, and then also this year too, like they have, even there's been some games where Eklund's, maybe sat a couple, like he makes some mistakes, he sat a couple, and I was mad about it. But like, I think David Quinn has learned a lot from his time with the Rangers, and is now kind of putting on, especially in a team that is very bad, and they know like Eklund, like you need to get Eklund's development right? Like that is the first foundational piece, right? In your franchise's rebuild, and getting a guy like Eklund to kind of one, buy in, and then two, do everything that you're asking for, and now he's doing it well, and I think you're starting to see the fruits of that labor. I think it's gonna help. Like, I don't see Eklund taking steps back, right? Like Eklund's never going back to the AHL. Eklund will never need to go back to the AHL, because even if he has a slump, and maybe we saw a scoring slump from basically mid-December to January, where I think he went like almost 15 games without scoring. Still, if you're not scoring, what else are you doing for me, right? Eklund's playing penalty kill. Eklund's driving lines. Eklund's making his teammates, his line mates better. And maybe he's not getting the point production that he wants. But I think when you have more talented players, and I think it's fair to say Columbus has a little bit more talented roster than the Sharks do right now. Because
again, it kind of goes back.
All I have to do is point to Luke Cunnin playing second line.
When you look at who Johnson's line mates have been, he's not. I know Eklund has not been getting the greatest line mates, but if Kent Johnson's most consistent line mates are like Jack Roslovic and Emil Bemstrom, what are we doing?
Luke Cunnin. That's my counter argument. Luke Cunnin is your second line's winger on the Sharks. So, but yeah, I think the Sharks, like you mentioned earlier, the patience is starting to pay off for San Jose. And I think Kent Johnson's going to be still a great player. And Kent Johnson was really fun to watch, and he's a very dynamic player. But again, it's like, if you're not scoring, that's the whole question. If you're not scoring, what are you doing for me? And Kent Johnson has been scoring, just he's not getting the opportunity to do more. And you kind of would like, especially what's already been a lost season, utilize these minutes for good. And I think the Sharks have been doing a little bit better job of like putting their young guys, even if it's not Eklund, right? Like Zetterlund, who's been playing on the penalty kill, and now Zetterlund, who was, kind of, especially after the end of last season, felt like a throw-in for the Timo Meier. Zetterlund leads the team in point and goals, and has been an absolute dog. He's got that, as the kids say, he's got that dog in him. Super fun to watch. And like looks like to be a long-term piece for the Sharks going forward. So yeah, it's going to be fun as we get to the last 30 games here, or less than 30 games. So I think the Sharks, we got one more game between us coming up here in a couple weeks, I think, in Columbus. So definitely feels like a Columbus win with the cannon going off a bunch of times. Jay, Where can the people find you, buddy?
I mean, I can't in good conscience recommend paying attention to the Blue Jackets, but if you do want to do that, Locked On Blue Jackets is everywhere that Locked On Sharks is. We're on every podcasting app you can think of. We're on YouTube. You can find us on SiriusXM. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. I've been tweeting a lot about Jaromir Jagr today because of who I am as a person. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets on Twitter as well. Lots of yelling about Ken Johnson over there, if that's, again, something that you are into.
Of course, you can find Locked On Sharks wherever you get podcasts. My voice is starting to go. And you can also watch on YouTube as well. You can follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. Follow me on Twitter at MyFryHole. Until tomorrow, we'll break down the Sharks Golden Knights game and then episode 1000 on Wednesday. So, yeah, until then.